A woman stands on a cold stone floor in Jerusalem, trembling in the presence of a king. We frame it as a courtroom drama, but if you look closer at the Hebrew alphabet beneath the English translation, even if a human mother could somehow forget the child at her breast, God says, "I will not forget you. See, I have engraved you on the palms of my hands." When Israel starves in Babylon, God's stomach physically turns in heaven. When they bleed under the whips of their captors, he feels the lash. His compassion is not a choice he makes from a distance. It is an instinct he cannot suppress. But applying this feminine, maternal word to Yahweh creates a massive theological tension, because for thousands of years, the world has been taught to call him Father. Look at how we talk about God in the modern West. We lean heavily on the masculine. We love the imagery of the warrior. We love the imagery of the king. We love the judge, the ruler, the conqueror. We want a God who splits the sea. We want a God who rains down fire. We want a God who crushes the enemy under his heel. Those images are in the text, but they are only half the picture. When you strip away the Rachamim, you get a distortion. You get a deity who demands flawless performance. You get a God who keeps a ledger of your sins in a heavy leather book. At the visceral reaction of the woman throwing herself in front of the blade, you start to see something the courtroom reading completely misses. You get a magistrate sitting in a sterile room, gripping a wooden gavel, just waiting for you to step out of line. That is not the God of the Bible. That is a pagan projection. The ancient Hebrew writers are actively tearing down our neat theological boxes. They know exactly what they are doing when they use the word Rachamim. They are taking the ultimate authority of the Father and fusing it with the agonizing biology of the mother. A human father does not have a womb. He does not stretch in the dark to accommodate another heartbeat. He does not feel his own skin tear to bring a child into the light. He does not physically ache in his abdomen when his child cries in the night. But Yahweh does. We are terrified of a God with a womb. We are terrified because it makes him vulnerable. A judge on a bench is safe. A judge is untouchable. A judge cannot have his heart broken by the defendant. But a parent can be shattered. A parent can be absolutely destroyed by the child they brought into the world. When the prophets use Rachamim, they are exposing the vulnerability of God. They are telling us that God allows our rebellion to hurt him. He allows our wandering to tear at his own gut. Because this text is not a lesson on human parenting, it is a lens into the chest of God. He holds a tension we can barely comprehend. He gives the law like a father. He aches for the broken like a mother. He writes the commandments in cold stone. He writes our names on the palms of his bruised hands. He demands absolute holiness. He bleeds to bridge the gap when we fail. This changes how you read every page of your Bible. It completely changes how you view the incarnation. When Jesus steps into the dirt of first-century Palestine, he has to explain this reality to a group of religious leaders who have completely forgotten it. They have turned God back into a cold, distant magistrate who demands pristine behavior. Jesus has to show them what Rachamim looks like when it wears human skin. So he tells a story about a rebellious boy, a story about a squandered inheritance, a story about a pig pen that reeks of mud and rot, and the detail that changes everything happens on a long dirt road. Before a single word of apology is even spoken, the sun beats down on the cracked, white dust of a Judean road. A boy is walking home, and he smells like stale sweat. Pig manure, an absolute shame. His feet are bleeding through the broken leather of his sandals. When we hear the word mercy, we picture a courtroom. We picture a judge seated behind a heavy wooden bench. Every step sends a shock of pain up his calves. But his mind is entirely focused on a legal defense. He is rehearsing a speech. He is preparing to face a magistrate. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. Make me like one of your hired servants." He expects a courtroom. He expects a ledger. He expects the heavy wooden gavel of a patriarchal judge to drop. But a mile down the road, an old man is standing on a roof. The father sees a speck of dust moving on the horizon. He squints into the glare. He recognizes the walk. And then, this wealthy, dignified Middle Eastern patriarch does something utterly humiliating. He gathers his heavy robes in his hands. He bares his legs to the village. He kicks up the dirt. He runs. He runs through the streets, abandoning his dignity, ignoring the stares of the elders, sprinting directly toward the smell of the pig pen. Look at the Greek word Luke uses to describe the father in this moment. The English says he was filled with compassion. The Greek word is splachnizomai. It literally means a yearning in the bowels, a trembling in the internal organs. It is the exact Greek equivalent of the Hebrew Rachamim. When the father sees the broken boy on the road, his stomach physically drops. We picture a ruler holding a gavel, looking down at a guilty defendant, and choosing, out of a sense of moral benevolence, to lower the sentence. His gut spasms. He does not wait for the rehearsed legal speech. He does not consult the financial ledger to see what the boy still owes. He does not demand a period of probation. He throws his arms around a body caked in filth and kisses a face covered in dirt. The law demands a restitution. The womb demands proximity. The father is not issuing a pardon. He is answering a biological ache. Jesus is taking the ancient, maternal heartbeat of God from the Book of Kings and placing it directly into the chest of the Father. He is showing the religious elite that Yahweh is the true mother in the throne room. God would rather humiliate himself. God would rather tear his own flesh. God would rather absorb the entire cost of the rebellion than watch the executioner's sword fall on his child. The robe is thrown over the rags. The ring is placed on the finger. The feast begins. But a dark shadow still lingers over this celebration, because we all know human compassion has a limit. We know that, eventually, even a parent's patience snaps. We wonder what happens when the rebellion happens again, and again, and again. We wonder when the Rachamim finally runs out. Picture a dry well, its stone walls cracking in the summer heat. This is how we naturally visualize human patience. We think of mercy as a legal transaction, a choice to withhold punishment, a decision made from a distance. But biblical compassion is not a legal decision. We treat mercy like a limited resource drawn from an underground aquifer. You lower the rope. You pull up bucket after bucket of grace, and you pour it out on a reckless friend, a difficult child, or a wandering spouse. But eventually, you hear the hollow scrape of a wooden bucket hitting dry dirt. The water is gone. The quota is met. We are creatures of absolute limits. We operate on a three-strikes system. We believe that, eventually, the mathematical ledger balances out, and the heavy iron door of reconciliation must swing, shut, and lock. And because this is how our own biology works, we project this exhausted, dried-up reservoir directly onto heaven. We think we have drawn too many buckets from God. We imagine we have worn him out. We assume the ticking clock of his patience has finally reached midnight. And now we are dealing with the cold, distant magistrate who is simply going to close the file. But look at the Book of Lamentations. The prophet Jeremiah is walking through the smoldering ashes of Jerusalem. The temple is nothing but a pile of blackened limestone. The air still smells of bitter smoke, crushed bone, and total defeat. It is the absolute bottom of human suffering. The exact moment where God's patience seemingly ran out and the Babylonians invaded. It is a biological necessity. To feel the weight of what actually happens in this room, you have to watch the guard raise his weapon. And right in the middle of that devastating rubble, Jeremiah writes a sentence that defies all human logic. His compassions never fail. They are new every morning. The English word is compassions. The Hebrew word is Rachamim. Jeremiah is standing in the ashes of a destroyed city, and he declares that the womb compassion of Yahweh has not dried up. The Hebrew word used for fail in this verse is kala, which means to be consumed, to be spent, to completely run out of supply. A human mother can eventually be broken by a wayward child. A human well can eventually run dry under a scorching sun. Our human biology has an expiration date, but Yahweh is infinite. His Rachamim is not a reservoir you can drain. It is the biological pulse of his eternal nature, because his nature has no end. His capacity to ache for you has no limit, because he is eternal. The womb of God never stops generating new mercies every single time the sun rises. He cannot stop feeling the visceral pull toward his children any more than he can stop being God, which means we have to completely reevaluate how we approach him when we fail. The executioner raised his heavy iron sword, and a mother's gut contracted in a king's throne room. The king gives the order. The steel catches the light, and the real mother breaks. Our English Bibles usually translate this moment cleanly. The ancient writers searched for the deepest vocabulary of grace, and they bypassed the courtroom to point to a woman's womb. A broken nation wept by the stagnant canals of Babylon, and God answered with the memory of a nursing infant. A father sprinted through the cracked dust of a Judean road, and the religious elite saw the womb of heaven wrapped in human skin. A prophet stood in the smoldering ashes of Jerusalem and declared that the compassions of Yahweh never run dry. The law demanded a flawless legal ledger, and the Creator offered a torn chest. We begged for the cold pardon of a distant magistrate, and we received the biological ache of a God who refuses to let us go. Same word, same God. But maybe the part that stays with me most is the stone floor in Jerusalem. Not the king, not the legendary wisdom. I keep coming back to the moment the true mother threw herself in front of the blade. She was perfectly willing to walk out of that palace empty-handed, willing to endure the absolute agony of watching a liar raise her son, just so the boy could breathe. It is the most terrifying vulnerability in the human experience. And the ancient writers looked at that shattered, desperate woman on the floor. They say something like, "The woman was filled with compassion for her son, and she said to the king, and said, 'This is what God feels when he looks at you.'" If you are in a season where you feel like you have drained the aquifer of grace, this is exactly where you need to sit. If you are terrified that you have finally triggered the gavel, if you think you have pushed heaven to the breaking point, you need to step out of the courtroom. God is not sitting behind a heavy wooden bench consulting a ledger to see if you deserve another chance. He is not a magistrate issuing pardons from a sterile distance. He is a father whose stomach drops when you hurt. If this reached something in you today, subscribe. Leave a comment, even one word helps. Share this with someone who feels like they have exhausted God's patience. Pray for us as we keep digging into these texts. And may the God who has never once loved you from a safe distance walk with you through your deepest wandering and bring you home to a mercy that is new every single morning. Please, give her the living baby. She gives up her claim. She saves the boy's life. But the word translated as compassion here holds a secret. She smells like stale sweat, panic, and a sleepless night. There is a living infant in the room, his cries bouncing off the high stone walls. It is a word that will echo out of this throne room. It will ring through the mouths of the prophets, across centuries of exile, and all the way to a Roman cross. It is a word that redefines the very nature of who God is when he looks at a broken world. There is a detail hiding in plain sight in the ancient text. The detail hiding in plain sight is how we have learned to define a single English word. When we read the Bible today, we do not read it with ancient eyes. We read it through the lens of our own culture. We bring our own baggage into the text. Look at the Western mind. We are obsessed with legality. We are obsessed with contracts. We build our theology inside courtrooms. Picture the modern legal system. A crime is committed. A sentence is required. A judge sits high behind a heavy oak bench. He is draped in black robes. The fluorescent lights buzz overhead. The air conditioning hums in a sterile room. A defendant stands below, sweating in a cheap suit, waiting for the verdict. The judge opens a file. He reads the statute. He looks down at the guilty party. Out of a sense of moral benevolence, he decides to waive the penalty. He issues a pardon. The wooden gavel hits the sounding block. There is a dead infant somewhere out of sight, wrapped in burial cloths. And there is a sword, heavy and dark with forged iron. The room exhales. The defendant walks free. We call this mercy. But look at the mechanics of this moment. Look at what is actually happening. The judge feels nothing. The judge loses nothing. His heart rate does not elevate. His breathing does not change. His body does not physically ache. When the defendant is set free, a judge can offer mercy to a complete stranger. A magistrate can pardon a man he will never see again. The legal system requires this distance to function properly. A judge must be blind. A judge must be impartial. A judge must never feel the pain of the person standing trial. The Western concept of mercy is not a tearing of the chest. It is a stroke of a pen. It is clean. It is sterile. It is entirely detached from the body. And for centuries, we have taken this Roman, Latin framework and we have laid it directly over the God of the Bible. We turn God into a reluctant magistrate. We imagine him sitting behind a cosmic bench. We imagine him holding a gavel. We think he looks at our failures, consults a heavy ledger, and simply decides not to strike us down. We think of salvation as an acquittal. We think of forgiveness as a canceled check. We think of grace as a legal loophole in the system. But the Hebrew mind does not live in a courtroom, resting in the hands of an executioner. Two women live in the same house. Both gave birth within days of each other. The ancient Israelites did not worship a Roman magistrate. They did not build their faith on legal fictions. They lived in a world of dirt and blood. They lived in tents made of animal hair. They understood that life is violently, unavoidably physical, and they knew their God was not distant. He was not impartial. He was hopelessly, deeply attached to his people. For the Hebrew writers, compassion could never be a cold calculation. It had to be visceral. It had to be a biological reality. It had to originate somewhere deeper than a legal ledger. This is why the courtroom metaphor eventually collapses. This is why a judge with a gavel can never fully explain the God of the Bible. To find out what mercy actually is, you have to leave the modern courtroom. You have to go back to the stone floor in Jerusalem. You have to watch a mother staring at a blade. The guard steps forward. The heavy iron blade catches the sunlight streaming through the cedar pillars of Solomon's palace. The king's command still hangs in the air, the terrifying words bouncing off the cold stone walls. Cut the living child in two. The false mother stands perfectly still, her face hardened by grief and jealousy. She is calculating the odds, clutching her own bitterness, perfectly willing to watch the sword fall so that neither of them walks away with a living son. One baby died in the dark of night. Now, both women stand before King Solomon, pointing fingers, screaming accusations, claiming the surviving boy as their own. But the true mother shatters. She throws herself forward, her hands shaking, her voice cracking as she screams for the king to stop. She begs him to give the living baby to the liar. She would rather walk out of this palace empty-handed, enduring the agony of watching another woman raise her son, than see a single drop of his blood hit the floor. When you read this in most English translations, the text says, the woman was deeply moved or filled with compassion for her son. But those English phrases are far too weak. They make it sound like a passing emotional sentiment, a noble feeling of sadness that flits across her mind. The ancient Hebrew text is infinitely more violent. The writer of 1 Kings does not describe a thought in her head, and he does not describe a moral choice. He describes a severe physical reaction happening deep inside her abdomen. Her surrender is not a legal concession. It is a biological imperative. We modern people talk about emotions as if they happen entirely in our brains, or in the metaphorical shape of a heart. But the ancient Hebrews were profoundly earthy. When an ancient Israelite felt a devastating emotion, they did not point to their head. They pointed to their stomach. They understood that real trauma, real love, and real fear always hit you in the gut first. She cannot let the child die because, for 9 long months, that child was stitched into the very fabric of her own body. The king listens. The court is silent. And then, Solomon gives an order that sounds like absolute madness. He asks for a weapon, Every time the infant kicked in the dark, her own ribs ached. Every time the child grew, her own skin stretched to accommodate his life. They shared oxygen. They shared nutrients. They shared a heartbeat. Even though the physical umbilical cord has been severed, the connection has not. When the guard raises the iron sword over the baby, the mother feels the blade aimed directly at her own flesh. Her compassion is an agonizing, inescapable ache in her gut. And this is exactly the moment the biblical authors use to teach us the vocabulary of heaven. Because to describe what is happening inside this panicked, desperate woman on the stone floor, the writer uses a very specific Hebrew word. And that word changes everything you thought you knew about the way God looks at you. Look at 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 6. Our English Bibles say, her compassion was kindled. The Hebrew word, pulsing beneath that phrase, is Rachamim. It is a plural noun. It appears 39 times in the Old Testament. It is translated as mercy, pity, and deep compassion. But peel back the translation. Look at the root. The root of Rachamim is the singular noun rechem. Rechem is not a legal term. It is not an abstract concept. Rechem is anatomy. Rechem literally means the womb. He commands the guard to cut the living child in two and give half to each woman. You have probably heard this story. When the Hebrew writers want to describe the deepest mercy in the universe, they do not point to a courtroom. They do not point to a judge with a gavel. They point to the dark, warm, watery space where life is knit together. They point to blood and fluid and stretching flesh. When the executioner's sword lifts, the mother's rechem groans. Her stomach muscles physically contract. She feels the blade in her own gut before it ever touches her child. This is Rachamim. Mercy is not a stroke of a pen. It is a spasm of the gut. It is the fierce, agonizing, biological attachment a mother has for the life that originated inside her own body. If hearing the ancient language shift like this is answering questions you did not even know you had, you are exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we dig past the English translations to find the raw, original heartbeat of the text. So the word Rachamim moves out of the palace. It does not stay a human emotion. It becomes divine identity. Israel begins to use this exact biological word to describe Yahweh. Every time they cry out for mercy, they are literally asking God to feel them in his womb. They are asking him to remember his biological attachment to them. Most people assume this text is a lesson in ancient psychology, a clever trick by a young monarch to figure out who the real mother is. They are appealing to the gut of God. But this idea of a God with a womb eventually faces a terrifying test. It happens centuries later. It happens when the nation loses absolutely everything. The Babylonians march on Jerusalem. The stone walls fall. The air fills with the smell of burning cedar, crushed limestone, and rotting bodies. The people are chained and dragged across a burning desert. And in the middle of that devastating exile, God speaks a sentence through the prophet Isaiah that shatters every category we have. Dust chokes the air by the Chebar Canal in Babylon. The Israelites sit by foreign waters, their harps hanging uselessly on the branches of willow trees. The thick, humid air smells of stagnant canal water and strange Babylonian spices. The heavy mud of the Euphrates coats their ankles. They are 700 miles from the crushed limestone and burning cedar of Jerusalem, and they are utterly convinced they have been abandoned. They believe God has acted exactly like a human judge. From their perspective, the theology is simple. They broke the covenant. They committed spiritual treason for centuries. Finally, the gavel came down. The righteous sentence was passed. And now they are serving their time in a foreign prison. They assume God has simply closed their file, locked the doors of his throne room, and walked away. Zion weeps in the dark and says, because he knows the true mother would rather give her child away than see him bleed. We read it as a story about judicial brilliance. The Lord has forsaken me. My Lord has forgotten me. But when God answers through the prophet Isaiah, He does not use the language of a magistrate. He does not mention legal ledgers, justifiable sentencing, or the terms of a broken contract. He goes straight to the biology of a mother. Through the prophet, God speaks in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 15. Can a woman forget her nursing child? Can she have no compassion on the son of her womb? Look at the Hebrew pulsing underneath the English text. Can she have no Rachamim on the son of her Rechem? God forces an entire nation of exiled, broken people to look at a nursing mother, holding her infant in the quiet of the night. He asks them if it is possible for a mother to simply erase the memory of the child that tore through her own body. He asks if it is possible for her to feel nothing when her child cries out in pain. Even if the child grows up and rebels, even if the child runs away and breaks her heart, the mother's body remembers. Her nervous system is permanently rewired. She feels his absence in her chest. God is telling a captive people that his attachment to them is deeper than their rebellion. His memory of them is not a record in a book. It is a biological ache